Have you ever taken a photo of interference? Grabbed a snapshot of quantum tunneling? Find out how to access quantum physics as a service in this episode of the Post-Quantum World. I'm your host, Konstantinos Karagiannis. I lead quantum computing services at Protiviti, where we're helping companies prepare for the benefits and threats of this exploding field. I hope you'll join each episode as we explore the technology and business impacts of this post-quantum era. Our guest today is the founder and chief strategy officer of Infleqtion, Dana Anderson. Welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here, Konstantinos. I thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming. This special episode covers how listeners can get hands-on with the quantum world in a way they're not used to. But before diving into that, just tell us quickly how you found your way to quantum in general.
Well, it was hardly an accident. Actually, I have physics in my genes somewhere. My father was a physicist. He worked with Enrico Fermi. So in some sense, I was born into a quantum world. But my personal one really started when I went to graduate school and I got a PhD in quantum optics. And quantum optics has an awful lot of parallels to what we'd be talking about today with atoms instead of photons. So my story starts probably in 1975, but goes all the way up to the present day. Detailed story. Fill in anything you like, but might be more interested in figure out how we get into cold atoms.
Yeah, that's great. And we've had Infleqtion on before, but maybe you can just give listeners an overview of the types of work your company does in case maybe this is the first episode they're hearing. Or
Absolutely. So Infleqtion was formerly Cold Quanta. It was founded all the way back in prehistoric times called 2007. It was founded following the first demonstration of truly ultra-cold matter, a Bose-Einstein condensation, and we wanted to get the technology out to the world. So we started making products that enable other people to get this fifth state of matter, as it's often called, and by now, this company is hardly a startup. We do everything based on atoms, whether they're charged, so atoms or ions, from clocks to quantum computers and many things in between, including quantum memory, including RF detection by atoms, which we call quantum RF detection, and inertial sensing is one of the things I'm very close to, because that I've been doing since my PhD. So very broad spectrum of quantum things and quantum components.
Yeah, and some terrific software capabilities too. Love the folks on that team as well.
Super tech, they're outstanding.
Yep. Great gang. So now on to Octant. When we get hands-on here, it's usually software related, Yes. So this is a little different. The closest we've come to something like this, I guess, is that we had one episode where you're building your own sort of quantum device, but it's not a quantum computer. It was more like a neutral atom type of space. But this is the first time we're talking about accessing something that's not a computer on the cloud. So if you want to just give us a sense of what the platform does.
So the hardware platform produces a quantum state of matter called a BEC, Bose-Einstein Condensate, and the interest is what you do with the BEC. But even before what you do is just understanding, getting a very different picture of quantum than you might have. Really hands-on, you can take a picture of a quantum wave function. I'll talk just a bit more about it, but in the end, of course, you do talk to the machine with software. And software is going to play a very dramatic role in what the machine becomes, as we'll talk about. But let me turn it back to you with questions, and we'll go deeper and deeper as you wish.
Yeah, and keying on something you said there, we're going to drill into a moment. You're literally able to take a picture of something happening in the quantum realm. So that's kind of amazing. You initiate it, and then you capture this. So I was able to see some of that visualization back at the Q2B show, and it was pretty impressive. That's why I wanted to have you on. So maybe you can just start with a little refresher or maybe even intro to some listeners on what a Bose-Einstein condensate really is.
Absolutely. And since we're on only audio and not video, you can't see my hands. So I'm going to do my best to describe what my hands do. But my colleagues at the University of Colorado, Carl Wyman, and Eric Cornell, and also Wolfgang Ketterle from MIT, demonstrated the first Bose-Einstein condensation. Not surprisingly, Einstein's name is associated, and an Indian colleague, Nathaniel Bose, said that when you get atoms close enough together and cold enough, they will undergo a phase change, much in many respects the same way as ice turns into water or water back into ice as you cool it, a phase change to a different kind of matter, purely quantum, when you get the atoms close enough together and lower the temperature enough, very close to absolute zero, they form a single quantum wave function. Many people know that just an individual atom will have quantum properties, but when you take a whole cloud of them, get them close enough together, they lose their identity and get together to form one quantum wave function. It's called macroscopic, because you might have many atoms participating, and they can be the size of almost the width of your hair. So it really is amazing. You can take a picture of them, and that's taking a snapshot of a quantum wave function.
Yeah, that's impressive, because most people don't think of anything remotely macroscopic as still being quantum. And of course, we've had different things over the years that cross that barrier, like buckyballs, for example. You're able to do sorts of quantum work with that. So in theory, if we separate it from the device for a moment, why should someone care about a BEC? Let's just in theory, like, what can they do?
So let me move all the way forward and then back up. One would love to take what we do today with electrons, and electrons are at room temperature and don't remember themselves as being quantum for very long. It's just a couple of picoseconds, and do many of those things in the quantum realm instead. So you can think of the circuits that you have in your iPhone, although they're very powerful and very sophisticated. So we'll be a little bit more primitive in going back to the early days of transistor radios, say, and doing everything that we do today with electrons with atoms instead, and atoms that are in the quantum realm. You can make, for example, absolutely incredibly sensitive detectors. One of our interests is replacing positioning systems that usually use GPS with a sensor to tell you where you are and what time it is. And when you do that in the quantum domain, it can be far more accurate than any other way of doing it. And so, in principle, you can make circuitry that are powered by Bose-Einstein condensates, roughly speaking, in much the way that you make electronic circuits these days, powered by batteries. And that's a little far-fetched, but that, in fact, is what our goal is, and why we've started to put these machines on the cloud, so other people can become innovative along these lines. Now we can back up. I'll pause for you, but we can back up to sort of more immediate things, a little more palatable and tangible.
Yeah, so there are some forward-thinking theoretical hopes, right, to come out of this. And in a little while, I want to ask you a little bit about what you might have actually already seen people doing. So what can you do now? Let's say if you were to log in, what would you be able to experience and experiment with today?
Well, let's first talk about sort of from an educational purpose perspective, because quantum is hard, right? And wrapping your head around what quantum is quite a challenge for most of us, including me. So first of all those things you've heard about, such as superposition, such as tunneling, you can do all of these experiments by starting with a cloud of atoms that you cool down to about 100th billionths of the degrees of absolute zero. You could never do that before. Reach a machine and say, I want atoms that are 100 billionths of a degree below absolute zero, form a quantum state, and watch them tunnel. It's still mind-boggling to me today that you can take a pair of clouds of these atoms, each a BEC, and watch them come towards each other and interfere. And we usually think of atoms like ping pong balls. If you had two clouds run into each other, they just wreak havoc and bounce all over each other. Instead, suddenly when these clouds go, you see regions where there should be balls, should be atoms, and there are not. It's dark, and others where there are far more atoms than you'd think there should be. This is the phenomenon of interference. And the fact that you get ping pong balls, so to speak, I really mean atoms, to interfere is just mind-boggling. The temperatures are mind-boggling. The interference is mind-boggling to watch. And then these strange notions such as tunneling, you can see for the first time. So that's first getting your head around this quantum phenomena you don't have access to normally.
So just to pause for a sec with the cloud idea. Sometimes when people hear cloud, they're thinking of a bunch of places that a particle might be if you make an observation, right? The idea that like instead of there being orbits around an atom, for example, you have more like a smearing. And then somewhere in that cloudy line or ring would be where the actual electron is if you were to make an observation. So, yeah.
So remember, this might be 10,000 atoms. They form a cloud. We don't know, and it makes no sense, this is the annoying thing about quantum mechanics, to ask, where are the atoms? If you look, you'll see them. That's why you image them. But as long as you don't look, they're only acting as one entity we call the BEC, and not a collection of individual atoms. So when I say cloud, I mean this collection of atoms, and I say cloud partly because they're held in a vacuum, and they're held in place by magnetic fields and laser beams, and you shine light through them, they look like they're just sitting there. So in that sense, they are cloud, and they take the shape of the container, but the container is made of light. And let me tell you, that's the beautiful thing. When you are programming this, you are programming how you're shooting laser beams at the atoms, and you're making them behave with laser light. And we'll get more into that perhaps, but that's another remarkable thing, is that they're just sitting there in the middle of a vacuum system, but all controlled with laser beams and sometimes magnetic fields.
Yeah, and then you see this and you can capture images of it. And then you can do the interactions, like you said, right? We could see them interfere. And then we could see tunneling actually happen right before our eyes, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So do you want to just describe, since, I mean, we can't really show images, maybe what tunneling would look like if someone was using this, just to get a kind of imaginary.
Yeah. So you can, so to speak, put atoms in a bowl. All right. You keep them in the bowl, and you know that if you think of a bowl of water, that water takes a certain level depending on how far you fill the bowl. And there's a lip of the bowl. And you can literally make a lip of a bowl that's done with a laser beam instead of, a massive material. It's made with a laser beam. You make a wall and a lip of a bowl. And even though the lip is above the surface of the liquid, the surface of the bowl of atoms, they show up on the other side. And that's called tunneling, because they shouldn't be able to get over it, but they can. And the reason that they can and do is because they behave as a wave, not as particles that you need to throw over a wall, but they can partly go through the wall, like light beams go through partially silvered mirrors. The light beams will partially get through. The atoms will partially get through the wall. And this you can take snapshots of and say, hey, they shouldn't be on this other side, but they are.
Yeah. So imagine, instead of spending time trying to create diagrams to show what quantum effects might look like, if we can imagine them, we can actually see them happening. So that's what I thought.
You see them happen. You can take snapshots, and a lot like birders like to do with rare birds. You can say, I took a snapshot, and here it is.
Yeah, it's the ultimate PowerPoint after this.
Yes.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. I wanted to clarify that for everyone listening. So these are some of the type of basic experiments we can expect. Do you get to experience two questions, really? First of all, let's say we're doing something like quantum tunneling. Do we get to do precise measurements and see how many atoms went across, or is that not?
You can actually. I would say the instrument, by some standards, it's the same in quantum computing. There's no great quantum computer out there. We're expecting them later. So the data you can certainly take. You can certainly count the number of atoms, but it will be noisy compared to some perfect picture that one has. It's partly noisy, in fact, because of quantum disks. The atoms are quantum themselves. So when you take a picture, you're actually looking at atoms, And maybe it's not surprising that's a little bit noisy. But yes, you can take data, and as time goes on, this machine will have more capability, and you'll be able to take better data. But you can take some today.
Yeah, what's amazing about that, even though like there's noise, like you said, these are the building blocks of translating from the theoretical ideas of what happens on that subatomic world to actually being able to count and see, and maybe even one day compare an expectation using something like a wave function of what percentage you expect to cross and what actually crosses.
Oh, you'll get all those answers about right if you do the calculations. In fact, what you didn't see at Q2B is our upcoming simulator. So you will be able to calculate using conventional classical computers what you should see. And in simple experiments, you'll see the same thing as the calculation, or pretty, at least resembling pretty well. As time goes on, the fact is the machine can do things that you just can't calculate. That's the nature of quantum. And the idea of the simulator is you can get an idea, but then you'll have to turn to the machine for what really happens, including when you want to do entanglement and things like that. And that's the fascinating thing. But there will be a simulator, so you can check, do a sanity check. The simulator should totally tell you what you expect, and then you'll see that the atoms do pretty much that in simple experiments, but a noisy version. And as time goes on, they'll be more and more faithful. And then as time goes on, you'll find you can do experiments that the calculations just can't predict.
So are there, so these experiments, are they fully documented in the interface that someone who's listening can like go in and do what we just described, for example? So
Octant was first publicly announced in December. And I will say that unlike quantum computing, where there's been this very long history of, since 1980s of people thinking about it, much less time has been put in there. So yes, there are documented experiments about doing interference and something called the Talbot effect, where you can see the atoms interfering. Over time, there'll be more and more, such as tunneling experiments. They're coming, but it's a young time now. Mm-hmm. So we invite people, in fact, to write programs, leave them with us. There'll be open source, coming in time, an open source way to do that, so that people can share what experiments they've done and the programs they've done them with.
Yeah, just like models we've seen in any kind of programming platforms for working with, let's say, a quantum computer.
Exactly right.
Share their code. Yeah, but in this case, remember, you're actually seeing these physical things happening, which is kind of mind blowing. For all these years I've spent just like imagining it, from Blackboard to whatever. Now to see it is amazing.
And they do all the things that you've learned and then some.
Yeah. And they appear. So can you explain what users would get with, let's say, the free versus paid tiers?
So free, you get 10 shots per day for free. Mm-hmm. And there you have full access to the machine. You can program either via the web interface, which is pretty primitive in what you can do, or by Python, Octopi, we call the language. And you can program what it does in Python. You get the data out, and you get 10 shots. The machine is currently on for several days a week and then off to upgrade or check and so on. But you can submit a job anytime, but it runs obviously only when it's up. So you don't know when it's going to come out after you put it in when you're working for free. When you have a subscription, a nominal subscription is about $10 per shot. And then you have priority in the running. So in the free version, if there are other people that put in a lot of jobs before you, you just are where you are. The paid jobs are prioritized. And then if you're really a hardcore researcher, you probably want to call us and get a subscription because you might want thousands of shots. And you might want them basically to own the machine for this slot of 10 minutes. So you get absolutely reproducible results, things like that. So that's not articulated except to say, give us a call, because we want to meet people's needs. So it's the first two are for anybody who walks up as either free or use a credit card. And after that, if you want to get really pro, it can get quite sophisticated about what you do and how you're given time to do it.
And it's still a great value because I would assume this thing cost a few million to make, right?
So and to run and maintain. I mean, It's yes, it's a couple of $1 million machine, I'd say, but more importantly is the time and the number of people, PhDs, it takes to build one of these machines and then maintain it. And so that's what you're paying for. And $10 may seem like a lot compared to going on Amazon Web Services, but take my word for it for now. It's quite reasonable. Our hope is that masses will eventually use the machine and the price will come dramatically down.
Okay. So when IBM first put quantum computers on the cloud, we saw the papers start pouring into archive. Has this platform led to any papers yet?
It actually has in a private use, but here's what I have to say. So remember that when quantum computing in the cloud, the world had already been invested. IBM, Google had already invested considerable time in developing infrastructure and so on. So first of all, users were primed. And here, our user community, this is brand new. There is a community out there that has used machines like this. So let me say today, operating since 2018, is a predecessor to Octant, been operating on the International Space Station for this many years, since 2018, every day, generating BECs. And papers have come out of that. Mm-hmm. And then other researchers have used Octant-like machines for studying black holes. For example, very scientific research. Our hope is to enable an industry like the maker industry, community of people inventing things. That's what this machine is for. So no, not yet. It's been publicly announced in December, but we sure do hope that this is what happens. And we will encourage people to reach out to us. We'll help them do that.
Yeah, this is the ground floor here as far as having access to something that can lead to really, really novel research. So what would you like to see this platform lead to or evolve into?
Well, I will tell you specifically that in my own domain, we use a platform like this, and later I expect this will also be in the cloud, to make sensors for position navigation. Mm-hmm. Really hardcore, serious GPS replacements. The next thing is heavily intermixed with machine learning, because quantum system, I don't want to get carried away with all the AI and so on, mm-hmm. but the fact is that quantum is hard to understand and hard to get to behave the way you want. So I'm very much involved with machine learning approaches to controlling quantum systems to do useful things. So sensors are one thing. The other thing I mentioned earlier is much more along of what we call atomtronics, the analog of electronics. So one can make atom transistors that use atoms instead of electrons and work in the quantum domain purely rather than in the classical domain. So you can make amplifiers, oscillators, you can combine the behavior, and this does get carried away, but just by analog, all these things go into a radio. I'm not suggesting you make a radio out of atoms, but there's all kinds of detectors and radio-like receivers, for example, that one can make using atoms instead of electrons that are incredibly sensitive. You can also do, the things like you do with compute, do logic, although if you really want to do logic, a quantum computer is better. But there are other signal processing tasks that you can do with Octant that you can't do with the quantum computer that I look for people to do.
Okay, and with all that kind of signal transmission, maybe even tiny electronics can benefit, right? Like any kind of nano devices might be able to have receivers that are smaller, take up less space, less power.
Well, like the compute, there's likely to be functionality which is hybrid. You have a quantum system over here, it's processed mm-hmm. quantum, and then to go further, for example, you're not going to do communication with atoms, right? They'll always translate into light. You're not going to do heavy intensity classical computing with atoms. You're going to leave that to electronics. So yes, I envision atomtronic circuitry side by side with the electronic circuitry to carry out very sensitive detection, signal processing, and then make it useful to the world by communication or classical processing.
Okay. And can you envision any other experimental tools being made available as services? Is this like the first of many types of things you might want to consider offering?
So I'm not quite sure if this answers your question, but there'll be more and more functionality given, as I say, more and more components.
Mm-hmm.
But every component with atoms is made with light. And that's something I want to emphasize here. If you build an atom circuit and you don't like it, you just rearrange the light by your Python programming. So it's really the functionality, and then you'll be able to put more and more devices, more and more complex light patterns to make more and more complicated patterns. Yes. And as the community demands it, more and more functionality. For example, if you want to do RF signal processing, maybe there'll be an RF receiver that feeds into the atoms, added to the machine. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I was also thinking, like, could this be the beginning of a new breed? Like, I know you're working on like the gravimeter, right? That detects anomalies. Would there be versions of that might come online just to so people can experiment?
Absolutely. I mean, that is the other thing I was describing that I hope come in line is the development of inertial sensors for measuring the Earth's gravity. Mm-hmm. And so the scenario would be that an engineer or an inventor creates a new kind of sensor for maybe more precise, maybe it senses subtle seismic motion of the Earth or strange RF fields. Let them design it there. Then it gets turned into something that's actually deployed, used. So it really is a different culture of invention. And Infleqtion's intention of putting Octant aside from the educational one is to get many more creators and inventors access to very difficult technology and make it useful to speed the design, innovate, design, deploy cycle that quantum so much needs and is such a barrier to because it's so hard to make. And so this is designed to be a totally new paradigm for creation and innovation in the quantum domain. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, the whole maker approach, when I think back to the early days of X as a service, it was always, like infrastructure, software, that's it, whatever. Right. Now we've reached this level where we're actually playing with atoms as a service, one way or another.
It's quantum mechanics as a service, so to speak, and atomtronics as a service, and then to turn that into reality in time of making, delivering things based on the designs of users of Octant. And a key point is here, users of Octant currently get to keep anything that they do is theirs. All the IP is theirs. So that's meant to generate, interest in innovating with the platform, where people get to, keep their IP, develop their technology, and be able to leverage, online access to quantum mechanics and quantum systems.
Yeah, if you're patient, there's nothing stopping you from going to the link in the show notes and actually giving this a try. And everyone should, just to see it. It's amazing. The first time I saw it, I was kind of blown away. I just knew the gravity of what I was observing. And I don't want to make a bad gravity quantum joke or anything here, but but it was amazing. So before I let you go, were there any other updates on Infleqtion you wanted to give? Maybe roadmap or other kinds of things?
A roadmap for Infleqtion is actually going to be coming through a webinar in the not distant future. We're talking about this in the following week.
Oh, that's good.
But you'll hear much more about our computing effort. We've been pretty much below, not very much above the radar, put it in what we're doing in quantum computing. And, a key aspect is that Octant, what you see in quantum signal processing, is actually very much related to what we're doing in quantum computing in the long term. And in particular, to get quantum technology at the edge, as our world likes to refer to it. So you have this sensing, the signal processing, and the compute, all very much at the edge in the future. So I think folks will get a picture of that. And please do, you'll make me happy if your audience uses Octant, because frankly, we have to show that it's useful. And we want to see people doing useful things with it and bring quantum to the masses. and keep your eye on it, because it will be upgraded much more quickly than you see quantum computers upgraded, and have more and more capability over time. Yeah. So please do come back.
You heard the call to action. Right now, archive is a plain field waiting for your papers. So,
and we will have competitions to make the best, the coldest atoms, the most atoms, and the most interesting circuits with atoms. So watch for those as well.
That's great. So Dana, thanks again for coming on.
Thank you for having me. All the best to you, and all the best to the community we're talking to.
Now it's time for Coherence, the Quantum Executive Summary, where I take a moment to highlight some of the business impacts we discussed today, in case things got too nerdy at times. Let's recap. Infleqtion started 17 years ago following the first demonstration of Bose-Einstein Condensates. What are these BECs? Basically, when particles get cold enough and close enough together, they act as one wave function. BECs can be quite large relatively, almost the width of a human hair. Since 2007, Infleqtion worked on many practical implementations of quantum technologies, including quantum computing and sensing, atomic clocks, and software implementations we've covered on the show before. But now they're making available online a special device, Octant, that lets you interact with BECs and actually see quantum phenomena occurring. As fascinating as this is to look at in the web interface they provide, picture little colored dots swarming and interacting in clouds, you can perform real experiments with predictable outcomes you can verify, everything from interference to quantum tunneling. Infleqtion hopes that Octant will create a new quantum maker industry. Will some of these experiments lead to better sensors? Will we see circuits made of atoms that can help miniaturize other technologies? It's an open field of experimentation, and you can run 10 shots a day on Octant for free. Check out the link in the show notes. That does it for this episode. Thanks to Dana Anderson for joining to discuss Infleqtion. And thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe to Protiviti's The Post-Quantum World, and maybe leave a review to help others find us. Be sure to follow me on all socials at Constant Hacker. That's Constant with a K, Hacker. You'll find links there to what we're doing in quantum computing services at Protiviti. You can also DM me questions or suggestions for what you'd like to hear on the show. I'll be gathering these for an AMA episode I'd like to do in the future. For more information on our quantum services, check out Protiviti.com or follow Protiviti Tech on Twitter and LinkedIn. Until next time, be kind and stay quantum curious.